There it is. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks for being patient.
Our assignment is to the next chapter. So I read 3 chapters from my and a little bit like something. It turned out I heard it. I read 3 chapters. Yeah, but basically what happened. It wasn't that complicated because it's like that well just say time out. So basically the family, the main family are the great grandmother. Yeah. And I'm gonna have to draw that. Y'all will be around the while.
So you didn't share it.
But anyway, things started to.
Yes, I'll give it to you.
No, I mean,
How to do it.
yeah. It's just right here.
I click on share slides,
Yeah.
and I do share screen, and then I can.
Well, there's still.
Yeah.
Still
But then you have to pick those PowerPoint one. When you hit here, what? Ask you which one.
Okay, I got one.
Okay.
It's already there. I don't need to share there. Okay. Okay. What's been for you.
Hi, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. We have a big crowd on Zoom and smaller crowd in the room, but altogether a nice gathering. Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Thurston from the Maynard Public Library. Welcome to you all on this beautiful day. It's kind of odd that it's so very warm in late October, but we'll take it. So one programming note, on Saturday, November 4th, along with the garden club, the Maynard Community Gardeners will be holding a foraging class. So I think that's going to be interesting. The woman leading the class is going to bring examples so you can see and feel and touch things and learn how to find some edible food in the neighborhood. We do ask that you register for that. And if you'd like to hear about all of our programs, you can sign up for our weekly email newsletter. And before we get started, Allison's going to take questions after her presentation. So those of you in the room, raise your hands and yell out a question. Those of you on Zoom, enter your questions in the Q&A. And also for you on Zoom, captioning has been enabled. So please make use of that if you're interested. Okay, let's get started. We are so delighted tonight to have Alison Field-Juma here from OARS. She's the Executive Director. OARS is a nonprofit watershed organization for the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord rivers based in West Concord, and it has over 1,200 members. Alison has guided OARS work to rebuild the health of the 3 rivers through science-based advocacy, education, stewardship, and recreation since 2010. She is the chair of the Sowasco Wild and Scenic River Stewardship Council, serves on the board of directors and executive steering committee of the 495 Metro West Partnership, and is the chair of the Aquatic Invasives Management Subcommittee This is the longest title ever of the Suasco Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, SISMA. And I believe that is the longest title I've ever had. You sound like a very busy woman. So we are so happy to have you here tonight. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here, and I am now, I admit, I have not done a hybrid presentation before, so bear with me. I'm going to get that going. Sally, maybe you could just point out to me which one, I think it's screen 2, or is it, or is it that one, that's the presenter, Sally?
Fan makes it really hard to hear.
Why don't you jump up to the front, Jen? We can't turn it off.
You can't turn.
I know.
Jump up to the front, but
It's
just know that
It's broken. I know.
I think not this.
Sorry about that, everyone.
That looks great.
Yes.
Thank you for bearing with me as I get this thing set up. And it's such a pleasure to be here in Maynard. We love Maynard. The river runs right through Maynard. We have our Wild and Scenic Film Festival here. Maynard has a long history with OARS. And I'm Alison Field-Juma, the Executive Director. And I'm going to talk a bit about our rivers, tell the story of their ecological health. That is our focus of these beautiful, useful, and sometimes hazardous places. So with any luck. Minutes. Oh, I'll do this. There we go. It was okay. I can use the arrows. Yeah. Thank you. So first, just a few words about who OARS is. We were founded 37 years ago as the organization for the Assabet River by people who were paddlers, rod and gun clubs, conservationists, people who loved walking along the river and were sick and tired about how polluted it was. It was known in the local press as the cesspool of Massachusetts, not a good look. And so the organization was founded to try to figure out what was the cause of the problem and solve it. In 2010, and that's where we are. In 2010, we added the Sudbury and Concord rivers to our mission and changed our name to OARS. So that's who we are today. And it's a very special watershed. It's 400 square miles. It has 29 miles of wild and scenic federally designated river. It has 2 national wildlife refuges, a national historical park, and it is very close to 2 major cities. In fact, it's the closest wild and scenic river in our country to a major metropolitan area. So that certainly gives it a unique place and unique opportunities. And there are also a lot of people living in the 400 square miles. We have a lot of members. We depend on our members. We're a membership organization. We have a very active board of directors and staff. And what we really try to do is figure out how to tackle the problem of a very polluted river. Our approach is science-based advocacy. What that means is first we try to figure out what is the cause of the problem. What is the problem? It was pretty obvious at the time. What is the cause of the problem? And then we work with our communities to find solutions using sound science. That is our approach. And then we advocate using that. And in the process, we develop a lot of our science, our data come from our large cadre of citizen scientists who get up at 6:30 in the morning. Feel free to join them anytime. Let us know if you're interested. And they collect water samples, and that is the basis for our major data collection every year. So we use that data to advocate and for better legislation, better regulations, better policies, and that really that is what's going to make the difference. It provides the framework for us to achieve what we want to achieve. And we collaborate with all our municipalities, our partners, so many stakeholders and legislators. It's a huge team effort. We also want to take durable action on the ground. So do things now that, because of climate change, we're seeing that the things that we've advocated for pollution reduction, some of those things, the benefits are going to start to be reversed. It's getting hotter, there are deeper droughts, there are bigger floods. All of these things start to set back the progress that we've made in restoring our rivers' health. So we want to do now things that are on the ground, durable, to build that back, and also to make our rivers resilient and our communities more resilient to climate change. We want to engage them in caring for the rivers and the watershed. There are a lot of things that people can do. We need people to do it at their own homes, in their own communities, as well as working with us on our various initiatives. And of course, you always want to be bringing up the next generation of river stewards. So we educate, we work with the Boys and Girls Clubs, we try to reach out to people to engage them and educate them. And lastly, we want it, when you're on the river, if you've ever been in a kayak or a canoe or another kind of boat on the river, you discover that the roads and generally all the other problems disappear. It's a different world. It brings peace, it's beautiful, there's wildlife, it's a different world. So we really want people to experience that. So we do work hard to try to make it so that people can get out on the rivers. So, once upon a time, a long time ago, I want to talk about how our rivers formed in the first place. And it begins with ice. So here we have the great continental ice sheet. The continental glaciers, as they receded, well, as they were advancing, were carving out the bedrock and making the basic shapes of our landforms. And then as they started to recede, they left large piles of mineral debris all over the place. And in what they created as they receded were the sorts of landforms that we see today, eskers and kettle ponds and all those things. And in the meantime, they created two large lakes, which is why we have a lot of soils here that are actually from the bottoms of lakes. And these, you can see the lines there are the dams that were formed by all the debris that these glaciers had been pushing. And they formed Lake Sudbury and Lake Concord, which we don't talk about much anymore because they disappeared. And then, of course, it rained. And the rain went into the streams, and the streams went into the rivers and started to carve out those pathways. And on the right, you'll see the Merrimack watershed. Some people don't realize that we're part of a very big watershed, the Merrimack River watershed, which starts in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, includes Lake Winnipesaukee, heads south, gets to Massachusetts, goes east. It brings in the Nashua River, our rivers, and the Shawshene River, and then it enters the Atlantic Ocean in the Gulf of Maine at Newburyport at Plum Island. So we're part of a very big system, and this is going to be relevant to what I'm going to talk about. Oops, sorry. Evolution. So even longer ago, before that ice sheet, various species were evolving. And these species that I'm going to show you here are ones that were ready to come up those new rivers that were being formed. And the oldest one is the lamprey. And the lampreys are one of the oldest species of fish on Earth. And they're kind of a living fossil, and they're one of the first organisms with a spinal cord. So they're really right in there. They're what's called anadromous, which means that they spawn in fresh water, but they live their adult lives in the ocean. So they live in the ocean, they migrate upstream, spawn, and then they go back down again, like salmon. Oops. The next fish you see there with the yellow around it are the eels, and there's quite a gap there. They evolved, and I'm going to talk a bit more about them because they're such a fascinating story. But we find them in the Assabet River today. I don't know if Dave knew in cleanups. Sometimes if you pull it, there've been all too many tires in our rivers. But when you pull them out, people have found eels just resting. It's sort of a good shape for an eel. So they rather like that. So we know they're there. There have been a lot of studies. We know there are eels in our rivers. Herring are the Alosa species on the left. We have river herring, and which are blueback and alewife, and they are critical to the ocean food web. They're known as the potato chips of the ocean, which doesn't say much about nutrition, but it does say about how delicious they are. And they are the feed for sports fish, for our commercial fisheries, for mammals and birds in the ocean. So they are, in fact, a couple of species of whales, endangered whales. This is their food. So they're really a key piece of the ocean food web. And the last one, the biggest picture, is our wild native eastern brook trout. And they are, I think, particularly beautiful. They rival those fish in the Caribbean, and they live locally in our small, cold streams, and they cannot take the heat. They need to live in cool water. So when we talk about cold water fisheries or cold water streams, this kind of fish can live in them, but they don't go out to the ocean. So all of these fish are declining. Well, just to note, humans evolved a long time after all these fish. You can see them down there in the lower right-hand corner. So I have a story about eels because I just think it's interesting. They're the only catadromous fish in North America, which means they do the reverse commute. So they spawn in the ocean, but live their adult life up in fresh water.
Sorry to interrupt now. These two people at Concord, they're seeing something slightly different from this. So I'm just going to try and share it.
There are 4 options. So,
There we go.
Here we go. Oh, are they seeing the presenter view?
Yes.
Oh. Well, then they'll find the same.
Did that change it for you, Sam?
yes, that's it.
Oh, my
Thank you so
apologies to everybody online.
Thank you so much.
Now you get a bigger picture. So these fish, these eels, spawn in the ocean and then they live in their adult life in fresh water. They were extremely common. They're eaten by fish, birds, people. They're still eaten by people. They're very delicious. But they have this very mysterious life cycle. So the large adult eels swim down from the Assabet, they swim down the river, and as they go, now think of it, these fish, which are living in freshwater, have to change. Their body physiology has to change so they can live in salt water. You think about just the buoyancy alone could be an issue, right? So they actually change so that they can live in this new habitat for a while. They enter the Atlantic Ocean, so they go down, they go to Concord, they make the right turn on the Merrimack, and then they get to Newburyport, and they say, I'm in the Gulf of Maine. Great, but they don't stop there. They swim all the way out to somewhere around Bermuda, what's known as the Bermuda Triangle. I guess, that sort of adds to the mystery, where they spawn. And this has actually never been seen by people. It just must happen. And then so they spawn way out there. So then what happens next? So the little tiny larvae, they just float on the ocean currents. And because the currents come along and they sweep them up, and they sweep them up along the coast of North America, the East Coast, distributing them all the way along. And these little guys, they then are growing, and they turn into what are called glass eels, about 2-3 inches long. And they sense where there are rivers or estuaries. They can sense something in the water that's different, and they head that way. And then during this time, they keep maturing. As they start to go up the rivers, they turn into elvers, which are brown, maturing as they go. And now you can imagine, well, what would happen if they're going up a river, but wait a minute, they make it to the Assabet. How do they get there? There are all these dams. So what they can do is they go around dams and they go up dams. If the face of the dam is wet, they can often just work their way up the face of the dam. So that's quite amazing. And that's the reason that we have this migratory fish in the rivers, even though they are blocked. So not as many will make it. If there were no dams, they would be much easier trip. So they live between 5 and 40 years. And the males can be about 1.5 feet long, and the females can reach 4 feet long. So those are yes. Then people came. We know at the Pine Hawk site from a wonderful presentation here by Kimberly Connors about that this is site in Acton. Pine Hawk is one of the oldest records of people in this area. And that was a long time ago. There's evidence they were eating. There was plentiful fish, shellfish, other wildlife that was eaten, cooked, and clearly also evidence that they moved to the sea and back and forth from those archaeological remains. So that means that the rivers were used as transportation routes. And also, courtesy of Kimberly, this is a more recent snapshot. This is the native settlements around the time of contact with the European colonizers, and the people who lived here were to some degree mobile. They may have had overlapping territories and made seasonal movements. But at this point in time, this is pretty much who was here, the Nipmuc and the Massachusetts. As far as we know, the records are not particularly good on this. And if maybe 200 years earlier, it might have been different people. 500 years before that, might have been different people. We don't know. But these were the people who shall we say, suffered the contact with the settlers. And then what happened? So our rivers became what we would call working rivers. They powered the early industrial revolution. I'm sure you all know about Powder Mill Dam here in Acton, that there were powder mills there. It powered them. There were several mills because they would occasionally blow up, and they didn't want them all to blow up. So they would have maybe 6 or so of them, and one would blow up and the rest would be okay. So it was not, no OSHA then. It was hazardous work, but these dams were everywhere, all over our landscape for production of all sorts of goods, providing power. And I think it was Thoreau who was known to say that even the rivers observed the Sabbath, because the dam owners would raise the height of the dam on Sunday to hold back the water, to have enough water for the beginning of the week. And so the rivers would stop flowing at that point. So you can see an impact. So these rivers were dammed. They carried industrial and domestic waste away. And that had a very big impact. So this is a wonderful study done by Brian Donahue at local professor. And this was just a great title. I thought, damned at both ends and cursed in the middle. And that was the Concord and Sudbury rivers. And what this was all about. This is a map of the rivers that was drawn by somebody who you may have heard of, called Henry David Thoreau. Most people associate him with Walden and Woods, but in fact, he was really a river guy. He spent a lot of time on the rivers. He paddled on the Concord and Merrimack rivers with his brother. It was very, very important to him. And when the farmers in Wayland said, you know, that dam they built, those industrialists down in Billerica, they built that dam and it's flooding our fields, our meadows, our hay meadows. And we want them to take down that dam. So will you testify on our behalf? And he was a surveyor, among other things at the time. So he said, okay. And he looked at the situation a bit and went to Beacon Hill and testified on behalf of the farmers. And then after that, he thought he wanted to know a little bit more about it. He was a little bit puzzled by it. So he disappeared for a while in the Widener Library. And when he emerged, he was a citizen scientist of hydrology. He taught himself hydrology. And then he spent a few years observing the rivers. And he took measurements and he looked at this and he looked at that, looked at the flow of sediment, looked at what happens when it floods. He noticed that when water came down the Assabet River from a flood, it carried sawdust with it because of all the mills, all the trees that were being cut up there. And it was, so all the sawdust came down the river. And then at the end of the flood, there were sawdust rings on the trees upstream in the Sudbury River. So clearly the river had gone backwards. They'd come down and gone upstream because the Sudbury River was so flat. He's like, why is this happening? So in the end, he decided, based on all the data, and this is a map, this scroll map. It's really long, 91 inches long. This was his actual profile map he made of the rivers. And he determined that, and this holds today, that in fact it was not the Billerica Dam that was causing the problems for the farmers. It was, one was a tremendous amount of land use change and the erosion and the sedimentation of the rivers that was happening, that was starting to create sandbars and sort of natural dams in a sense in the river. And that was slowing the river down and making it flood. And the other thing was that lots of roads had been built with lots of bridges with abutments that went right up to the river, especially Route 2 here actually was one who really focused on, wasn't called Route 2 then. And that was the cause actually of the flooding in Maynard. So that was his contribution to river science. It's a wonderful book called The Boatman, if you're interested in that kind of thing. That details his process. So, you know, when I think about it, it's really one of the first environmental impact statements and studies done, because it looked at what was the environmental impact of this dam. So now more closer to the present. This is basically why OARS was founded. There was a lot of municipal waste going into the rivers. It had a very high phosphorus content, which is what we found out from all our water quality monitoring. And so we needed to do something about it. So in fact, after a lot of work, after a lot of appealing permits, after a lot of work with the EPA and the DEP and the municipalities and a lot of investment, tremendous investment by taxpayers, and all the parties involved, wastewater treatment plants were upgraded to provide very high level tertiary treatment that removed the phosphorus to very stringent permit limits. And the results were clear very quickly. You could see that there was no longer complete covering of duckweed, and we were able to start really using these rivers for recreation rather than, well, avoiding them. So the big question I think we could contemplate tonight is, how do we build climate resiliency and have healthy rivers? Because we now have these additional layer of challenges added to us. The big issues identified by our municipalities were flooding, when it comes to climate change impacts that need to be addressed and the vulnerabilities of our communities in this watershed. They were flooding, drought, extreme storms, and heat. Okay, all of those affect rivers, or rivers affect us. through those means. So this is just a map. This is the FEMA. This is the flood insurance rate map. And it shows the 100-year flood is the turquoise. The striped one is the floodway. So that's really where water would flow in a flood. And then lateral flooding through the turquoise areas. And then the orange is the 500-year flood. The 100-year flood means it has a 1% chance of occurring in a year. So it's really just a statistical thing, but it's very useful for planning and for regulation. The Wetlands Protection Act relates to this, so conservation commissions use it. One of the interesting things about Wayland is that the worst floods they've had have been not when they've had the biggest rainfall. It's been when they've had a very big rainfall followed by another very big rainfall before the first one was able to clear. So in fact, they get a flood on a flood. But then the Sudbury River moves very slowly and it built up into tremendous flooding. I think we may have some pictures of it later. And so this is one is that these rate maps are based on historical data with fairly recent measurement, but it does not take into account future or current now precipitation patterns, which, as we know, are more intense rainfall, more intense droughts. So this is what rivers really want to do. This is a marvelous map of the Mississippi River. This is just a soils map. And this shows how the soils have been deposited over time and how much the river has moved. So how do we reconcile intense land use with rivers? So we would say, give them more room and remove the barriers. This is just a map showing, oh, so many barriers. These are culverts, bridges, stream crossings, and dams in our watershed. You can see there are a lot. And as we develop our land more and more, we get more and more of these. And those little tributary streams, all those little sort of capillaries that feed the system, a lot of those are now in pipes. And the water goes into catch basins, rushes through the pipes, ends up in the river very fast, heads out to the ocean, and it's lost to us because what do we want to do with that water? We want to drink it, right? Almost all of our communities rely on wells. And so if that water doesn't go into the ground and it rushes away, we can't drink it. Oh, this is Wayland. It's one of those rain on top of a rain. And this is what we should really allow to happen. This is a floodplain forest. And here we have, during you may probably recall, a 2016 drought, this stream, Neshoba Brook, was completely dry. Basically everything, all the aquatic life was dead. And talking with aquatic scientists, they say it takes about 7 years for that life to come back. The problem is we're getting these droughts more frequently than 7 years. So you can see what kind of impact there can be. So what could we do to help instead of hinder? This is, there's a big dam in Lawrence. So those fish, they're coming in from the ocean. These are shad, alewife, there's blueback herring, lamprey, and American eel. They're coming up, and then there's this huge hydro dam in Lawrence. So what has been put in place with the licensing of that dam is there's an eel ramp, because the eels will appreciate that. And there's an elevator, or they call it a lift. And the fish can swim in, it goes up, and they can swim out the top. And it works to move the fish up past that dam. That's an elaborate and expensive system and can't be done everywhere, but we can work with nature to make the process work better. What we really want to do is have clean water, cool water, and connected water. Cool, we don't always think of hot water as a pollutant, but it is very much a pollutant. From the perspective of that brook trout, we can't take a lot of our trout. We measure the temperature in our streams. A lot of the cold water streams are starting to get close to that limit for those fish. So if they can, during a hot, dry summer, find their way to where there's lots of little springs and things like that, if they can find their way to those little refuges from the heat, they will survive. But if they get stuck by a culvert or dam, whatever is blocking their way, they can't make it. So we're about 200 years, almost 200 years after Thoreau made that trip down the river and was really thinking about how these, as he says, shoals of migratory fishes, salmon, shad, alewives, marsh bankers, and others, in the spring, their scales gleaming in the sun, and then the fry, which in still greater numbers wend their way to, downward to the sea. He was really lamenting that these times had passed. And in the same writing, he recognized that people weren't going to help. At that point, they were all about dams, about industrialization. And he said, "Poor shad, where is thy redress?" So he was feeling pretty glum about that. But now, 2021, we have a Merrimack River Watershed Comprehensive Plan, which one of its key pieces is to coordinate the restoration, protection, and enhancement of diadromous fish stocks and their habitats throughout the watershed. And we are in that watershed, and we are part of that effort. So I wanted to just say just a couple things about dams, because it's not obvious how these dams affect our rivers. A lot of people think that a dam will reduce flooding in one way or another. None of our dams do that, because they're what are called run-of-river dams. What comes in from upstream is what goes out downstream. It's like a speed bump is what happens. Say, like your cars, when they hit a speed bump, they pile up, but it's the same number of cars in the end that go down the highway after the speed bump. But in the process, you've got a traffic jam. So you've got degraded water quality because it's been held back by the dam. There's more sun coming on it in the summer. It gets hotter. Oxygen levels go down. It catches sediment. You start to get a buildup of a deep sediment that's full of nutrients. So you get a lot of aquatic plant growth that you don't want. So you're getting really bad conditions upstream of the dam. And of course, downstream, the fish can't get any further. And so they can't migrate to where they're going to breed or get refuge from the drought and the heat. So that's a fundamental problem we have with dams. And so what are we doing here as OARS? Why did we decide to take this on? I like this quote from a colleague, a fisheries biologist. "There's not one thing any of us in resource management can do that will restore fish and aquatic habitat faster than removing a dam." And so what we've done is we pulled together a technical advisory committee to look at all the dams in our watershed and evaluate them and prioritize them based on their ecological impact, and then also their condition, their hazard rating. And then we're taking that prioritization and we're putting it into an action plan that we can then go and talk with the owners and our communities about to see of the priority ones, what can be done about them. So this really gets us to be a durable response. This is what we want, something that's going to be there. If you fix a dam, you have to keep maintaining it. You have to keep managing it. If you take it away, no liability, nothing, it's gone. It's a permanent solution. But we also know that dams create ponds and lakes and impoundments that people value. It's their sense of place. They like the placid water. They may like the pond kind of wildlife, which is not river wildlife, but it's different. And also for the history, our industrial history, there's some wonderful stonework and just the story of our industrialization. So those are very real values that people have as well. But as you can see, they degrade the water quality and the biodiversity, among other things. And not to mention, if they break, it can be catastrophic. So you get a tremendous flood risk downstream of any dam, more so when there are houses or businesses or infrastructure downstream. the other thing about these dams is if it's not, it's full. These dams are full pretty much all the time. So that's a floodplain that is full. It's not available. So if you take the dam out, what you've done is you've created a much bigger floodplain to absorb those storms as they come down. And so that is a real advantage. So you reduce flooding upstream, you reduce flooding downstream. So a lot of people are just going to end with a few pictures of, because people want to know, like, okay, if you take a dam out, what's it going to look like? That's a fair question. So just a couple of slides. This was Sawmill Dam. This is what it looked like before it was removed, and this is only 6 months later. You can see that it is hardly a patch of mud. It greens up very quickly. I don't know if they seeded this or not, but there's a lot of seeds in the sediments of any impoundment, and so you get a pretty quick coming back of nature that is healthier and biodiverse. And you can see after 2 years, this is what it's starting to look like. So I wanted to end with just, this is another image of the Mississippi. I guess the question is, how does this story of rivers end? And that's really up to us. Rivers need to move and to flow. So we need to give them the space to do that and take out the dams where we can. And so that when you put your hand in the river, you can feel it actually flowing. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thanks, Alison. Who's got questions?
Can you tell me where that handicap dock is in Maynard,
Yeah, so do you know Ice House Landing?
off of Winter Street?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it's and there's the bike path is right there. There's parking there. And I think the town is doing some nice work to make it even nicer there. And that's where it is. And there's also now newly, you can rent kayaks. There's a self-serve system, which is really exciting because everybody owns a boat or wants to try to put one on the top of their car. So that's a very nice compliment to the dock.
And where, is that near the Assabet wildlife?
No, it's a bit before that. It's a bit downstream. So if you're coming out of town
Okay.
on 62, that's
117.
117,
Yeah.
and take a
Winter Street.
left and then cross, you're on the left side of the river and it's straight by the
DPW.
The DPW, yes. And also we have maps for recreation, river maps. We have some here. You can feel free to take them, and we have them online. And that shows all the put-ins and like how much parking there is there and how long a walk it is to get to where the water is and all those useful little details that can help you, make it easier. Any other questions? Any online?
There are no questions online. Let me encourage people.
So I came in kind of late, but you were going through the fish that are, I guess you were talking about the Assabet or the Sudbury?
Those are fish that would have been in the entire watershed, Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord rivers in the past.
Okay.
They are known to be there. They are known to have been there, but the ones that, apart from the eels, none of those are here currently because they can't get past the dams.
Okay. I was surprised how many dams there were.
There are a lot of dams, and this is because that was how everything was powered. If you had a sawmill, if you had a grist mill, if you had any kind of small industry or big industry, look at, and even here at Ben Smith, that's one of our larger dams on the Assabet, and that whole complex of factories developed there around it. So that was the way things were done. But they don't serve any purpose anymore. They're not producing power. Yes.
So what's the process of trying to take down a dam that you approach the town or?
Was it state?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the dam, depends who owns it. So it's really up to the owner. Some dams are owned by towns, some are by private individuals, some by the state. Just about every type of, and then there's ones that nobody can figure out who owns them, really. And so then it's up to the owner to decide that they would like to have it taken down or take it down. They have liability, they need to have insurance on it. If it's not in good condition, they've probably got a letter from the Office of Dam Safety that tells them to repair or remove it. And there are many reasons to want to take them down, but it's up to the owner. And then, of course, it really helps to start working with other people to try to figure out, have the community engaged, find the money, which is a big part of it. There's a lot of studies that are done in advance of taking down a dam. You have to study where are the wetlands, what are the sediments like, are they contaminated, what are the infrastructure around there that might be affected. There's lots of studies to make sure that it's done right, and make sure that every possible negative thing that could happen is minimized. So that takes time, it takes expertise, it takes money, and then of course you have to pay for the actual equipment to come and do it, and then usually have a bit of monitoring afterwards, monitoring for invasive plants, and just making sure that everything's working properly. That the permitting process is quite lengthy. And, yeah.
And the two pictures that you showed of dam removal look like they were fairly small dams. So I can see, but now you take something like a basement dam, I mean, it doesn't look like it would just quickly turn into a beautiful green meadow.
Well, actually, it's interesting. I don't know if any of you noticed this when Powder Mill Dam, he had a breach and he had to drain the impoundment in order to fix the dam. And it was interesting because it's not as big as the Ben Smith impoundment, but it is quite, still quite substantial. And it was just fascinating watching it almost immediately. All of that exposed mud turned green. And it was that way for a few years while he was fixing it. And plants grew up, and in fact, I think it may have sort of settled the sediments out a bit so that they weren't making the water quality as bad. So that does, and usually almost always you will take out some sediment just where the channel would be. Sediment, if it's contaminated, is very expensive to deal with. So something like the Ben Smith Dam, I mean, there was a big study done of all the dams on the Assabet by the Army Corps of Engineers some years ago to look at, it was actually a sediment removal and dam removal study to see would that improve water quality. Well, the answer is yes. But the sediment removal was phenomenally expensive. And it would only start to fill in again. So that was really not seen as a choice. The dam removal is very complicated because you do things like you would affect the water level, right? Obviously, and that could affect the groundwater level. And if people have wells, that might affect their wells or their firefighting ponds, like in Stowe, where a lot of people in the town rely on surface waters and groundwater for things that other places don't. So those would all have to be studied and figure out, well, what can we do so that isn't a problem? And in our annual meeting this year, we had a presentation by a gentleman who has done a lot of dam removals, and he showed so many different alternatives of ways to achieve, for example, the fish passage, but maintain the water level upstream. So by having a whole bunch of small, really very tiny, we call them little rock ramps in sort of a chevron shape, you could make it so the fish could get up, but by the time you get to the top of all of those, the water level is where it was. So I don't know if that would work in the Assabet, but I think it would be a really interesting thing to look at and see if that could do it. Another way it could be done is you can sometimes, some places, if you have enough room, make a bypass. So you sort of create a stream around and the main waterfall continues over the dam, but you actually have a bypass which the fish can go through, but you need quite a lot of space to do that. A lot of dams don't have that space around them. So there's ways to do it, but I would say that fish ways as such, fish ladders are not a very good option in general. They're one, extremely expensive. They don't work very well. They usually work for one or two species at most, or one species. And they require continual maintenance. So during when the fish are running, somebody has to every day check that it's not getting clogged with leaves and sticks and things like that. So it's not a small undertaking. You say, oh, well, let's just put in a fish ladder. It's actually not that easy. So although I think people are attracted to the idea of sort of, well, we can keep the dam and have fish ladder and everything's good. It's not that easy, and it doesn't get you the water quality benefit. So, that's something also. There's a lot of new technology. There's lots of ways of addressing it. And, we're very open to let's see, okay, what do people care about? What do we, what are the priorities? Are there some alternatives? What can we look at? Get the studies done, get the research done, and then start to narrow down, well, what are the real options here? So it's a process, it's a conversation. But it's clear that free-flowing rivers are healthier. And with climate change, it's particularly urgent to do that wherever we can.
So what is the goal? You've had so many dams. Do you have a goal of removal, or what's your plan?
Well, we are actually on the edge of having an action plan for continuity restoration. So what we've done is we've done this assessment of the dams that is sort of first cut, the ecological basis. But now, so we can prioritize them that way, plus according the ones that are in bad shape, the ones that are high hazard also are more of a priority. But now we need to go and look actually at the dams and really do the work to look and see where they are, who owns them. Some of them, it's not obvious, and put that together, because you can't really have an action plan if, for example, you have, an owner who has zero interest in removing their dam, and that we might put lower on the priorities for a while. So we do plan to have that come out, but we want to be sure we got it right before we do so.
A lot of private owners that you're talking about, or is that?
It's a whole mixture. Some are owned by towns, some are private owners. We're working with this one in Berlin right now. The private owner is dying for help. I want this, I don't want this dam anymore. The town doesn't want, I'd like to give the land to the town, but the town doesn't want it with the dam on it because it's such a liability. So how do we get rid of the dam so I can give the land to the town for conservation? They're completely stuck, and so that's a great situation, really. I mean, it's ready to go. But of course we have to go through the process. So there's some that are easier that way, and then there are others that are just much more complicated. And we know, the dam that holds Lake Cochituate in, I don't think we're going to drain Lake Cochituate. It's pretty nice recreational area, and the state owns it, and it's a state park. I don't think we're going to do that. But so that might be a good candidate for a fish passage, because the fish may find that as a very good spawning area that they can get there.
I don't know what river that.
So that's Cochituate Brook is off of the Sudbury River.
Okay.
There's a question online.
Yep. It's from Adelaide. Will maps of the put-in points be available at the library?
Yes, you can
Yes.
keep them.
We have a bunch of flyers here that we can distribute. Yes.
And it's also online on our website. It's like that version.
We have some comments, not questions, but comments. Talking about paddling. Southbridge Boathouse on the Sudbury River in Concord to Northbridge on the Concord River and back is an easy solo paddle in a canoe, except during the spring. He knows this from experience.
Yeah,
Sounds like a good story, Steve.
Yes, and also this year, as you all know, we've had a lot of rain and the rivers have been so high, and sometimes it may not be safe to go under the bridge, right? So that's sort of the opposite problem from what we usually have in the summer. And that is absolutely true. And it's a beautiful paddle. The Southbridge Boathouse is, a wonderful local company, and they also help us with water chestnut pools and things like that. So that's great.
Steve's also saying the stretch from the Sudbury River downstream of the dam in the Saxonville section in Framingham to the dam on the Concord in Lowell is essentially flat water, nothing like white water. The current in the spring is strong. Same.
Again, that's quite a long trip. That's basically the length of the lot of the Sudbury River. Though that's the whole wild and scenic section of the Sudbury River, actually, to Lowell Road in Concord, and it is beautiful. Yes, beware going downstream, because going upstream to get home is a lot harder when it's flowing this fast.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, Alison. We really appreciate you being here. This is a great talk.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you, everybody on Zoom.